All right, Michael, I'll let you take it away for now.
All right, thanks, Brian. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. So good to see you all again. It's been a few months. We'll do introductions in a minute, but first I'm just going to run through the agenda. So we're mostly talking about all the analysis work that we've been doing the last few months, which Brian shared the bulk of that with you last week, I believe. So the bicycle network analysis, equity analysis, trip potential analysis, and then one thing we're working on this week, which is still in process, but we wanted to share with you, is the unpaved trail analysis. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what's coming up in task 4, the recommendations task. Brian's going to give you all a public feedback update, and then we're just going to briefly go over next steps. And we've got time set aside after each of these sections to answer any questions, comments that you all have. So especially since this is a small group, please feel free to chime in when you want. This doesn't have to be super formal. And I don't want to be talking for the whole hour, so please chime in when you're ready. Okay. So obviously a lot of these people aren't here, but it would be nice if we could just do a quick round of intros. My name is Michael Blau from Tool Design. I'm a senior planner and the project manager for this contract. And last time I think we did like an active transportation icebreaker question. I can't remember what exactly it was. Today I want to ask you all, like, when was the last time you walked in 90-degree weather for more than half an hour? Because that's what I've been doing down in New York lately. But I'm guessing in Chittenden County, it's probably what, like in the 70s right now? All right, well, you can answer that, or if you have any other fun active transportation tidbits to share, feel free. I will pass it off to the CCRPC team.
Thanks, Michael. Good question. Yesterday there was an icebreaker about favorite summer foods, so I'll throw that in the mix. I was telling Michael before that we started the call officially. My family in Texas has been texting that it's like 108 down there. So, it feels like 115 or something. So kind of glad I'm not there, even though 85 here feels like 100 to some people. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. I'll put the Texas thing there, hot there. Lainey, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Brian. Eleni Churchill with the CCRPC. The last time I walked in the 90-degree weather, I usually walk in 90-degree weathers in Cyprus every time I go in the summer. Actually, in 110-degree weather, I walk. I try not to walk half an hour in 110, but sometimes it happens. So I am very used to it. I don't think I like it anymore, but I'm used to it. And I am going to move on to Marshall. Marshall?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I'm Marshall Distal, Transportation Planner with CCRPC. I feel like we had a 90+ degree day here in Vermont not too long ago. And I was pretty sure during that hot day I was playing soccer for more than a half hour plus. I think that counts. So I will pass it off to whoever is next.
How about Jonathan? He's on my screen right underneath you.
Hey folks, Jonathan here. I'm the Complete Streets Program Manager at Local Motion. I can't remember the last time I walked for any real period of time in 90-degree heat. I definitely went mountain biking recently in 90-degree heat, but it's sort of a different thing when you're exercising and sweating than it is when it's like the middle of a work day and you're trying not to sweat, but you have to walk somewhere. So yeah, I try to avoid that if I can, although I do like the heat.
Great. How about Lauren next?
Great, thanks. I'm Lauren Chakoti. I'm the operations manager with the Winooski Valley Park District. And I try to avoid walking too long when it's 90 degrees. I just don't do well in the heat. But my most memorable walking in 90-degree heats for a very long period of time was actually a couple of years ago, backpacking over in the Whites. It was over 4th of July weekend, and it was like about 100 degrees, and yeah, it was miserable. So I've been thankful that this summer has been not 90 degrees here. So hoping it stays that way. And I guess I'll pass it off to, I guess, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Amanda Freshley. Pronouns are she, her, and I work with the Vermont Department of Health in the Burlington District Office, which serves Chittenden County. I'm originally from Missouri, where I like to say during the summer, it's 100 degrees and 1,000% humidity. So I'm really happy to be up in Vermont, where it's not quite so swampy. But a few weekends ago, it got pretty hot here, and I don't know if it reached 90 degrees, but it was pretty warm, and I was gardening all day, moving kind of in slow motion, but I was out there all day and got everything done. So I think that's probably that's the closest that I'll get. And I think Lucy, have you gone yet?
I have not gone.
All
I'm
right.
Lucy Gibson. I'm with Tool Design Group and working with Michael and others on our team. And my most recent hot weather experience was, well, several days in Boston the last few weeks, where we've had some heat waves, and the streets without trees get really hot, especially the wide ones. So I've definitely experienced them, and even riding a bike to work, which is, I don't usually walk probably more than half an hour anywhere around down there because things are close, but arriving to work and needing to take a shower and get cleaned up before you can be in good company is something that I definitely experienced. So the importance of showers at work.
And our office in Boston is usually at like 68 degrees. So you cool down pretty fast once you're in there, right?
The air conditioning, yeah.
All right, thanks, Lucy. Lucy is also going to be supporting the recommendations development on task 4. So I wanted to loop her into this conversation, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more later. So again, thank you all for joining. Good to see you all again. And thanks especially for taking time out in the middle of July when everyone else is on vacation. We appreciate it to keep this project moving. So like I said, we're mostly going to be talking about the analysis work we've done today, and just going to dive right in and start with the equity analysis. So I'll give you all a quick rundown. We don't want to assume that everyone has had the time to read through each of these memos. So I'll give you some high-level takeaways, and then we'll open it up for questions. The equity analysis looked at a few different indicators of disparities throughout the county. So racial disparities, income, and several other topics that I'll show you in a moment. It also took both a qualitative and a quantitative approach. So we did a qualitative review of the historical inequities in Chittenden County with a focus on these things here: urban renewal, highway construction, public housing, deindustrialization. We also looked briefly at current policies and trends that are continuing to cause inequities and disparities, things like police harassment and racial profiling. And then we conducted a quantitative spatial analysis of different equity indicators, which we'll see on the next slide. So the memo offered some key takeaways about disparities based on race, income, transportation access and costs, and other topics. And just want to call out the fact that the focus on the historical context and how things have developed in Chittenden County is somewhat unique. It's a bit of a deeper dive than what CCRPC has done in the past. So hopefully there's some new information in there for you all. These are the indicators that we looked at. For each one of these indicators, we mapped out trends in Chittenden County. And I'll show you a few examples of that now. I'm not going to go through all 8 of them. So for race, we created a dot map. Each of these dots equals 25 people, and that shows race and ethnicity distribution throughout the county. And probably what you all know and expect, just sort of anecdotally living there, that racial and ethnic minority groups are mostly within this larger urban communities. One thing that we called out in the report is the fact that growth in bicycling is increasing more quickly in communities of color, as this graphic shows. And so we just think it's important to note that, given that trend, we really should be prioritizing bicycle improvements in communities that are majority people of color. And we're going to talk about how we're doing that through this project and a little bit through some of the other analyses that we've been working on. For the poverty map, you can see, again, concentrated in Burlington, suburbs around Burlington, and also St. George further south, which shares a census tract with Heinsberg. So that's why that entire square is lit up, but really it's mostly St. George contributing to that. We also looked at age groups, so both youth and older adults. For seniors, the highest proportions of adults over 64 years old are in South Burlington and Shelburne, as well as the northern part of Burlington. And we also noted that the share of older adults is on the rise in Chittenden County. It's grown about 13% between 2013, it's grown from 13% to 16% between 2013 and 2019. So a larger and larger share of the population. We also have a listening session with AARP members a couple of months ago. And that was, really informative just about their experience as older adults navigating the county, both walking and biking, but especially when it comes to bicycling. They had a lot of, great insights to share. And then the last example I wanted to show is the zero vehicle households map. So showing that, these are mostly concentrated in Burlington, Winooski, South Burlington, Shelburne, and a few other areas. And obviously we know that active transportation is even more important in those communities who have low vehicle access. So a few takeaways from the equity analysis. Chittenden County's population is growing more diverse thanks to new residents. So the county's population grew 7.5% in the last 10 years, with 83% of new residents identifying as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And that group makes up about 11% of the county's population overall. We also noted through some data sources provided mostly by Burlington area groups, as well as some statewide sources, that police harassment and racial profiling is a problem for Black motorists in Chittenden County. There are no data to indicate whether it's a problem for active transportation users, but if any of the other communities we worked in are an indication, it's that's a problem in a lot of the places where we work. We hear that frequently in outreach and engagement sessions with those populations. So it would be prudent to collect data on that topic for Chittenden County and try to get an understanding of whether people who are walking and biking in BIPOC communities are facing this problem. And then this last point is sort of a broader thing to think about as we approach active transportation planning in underserved areas. We want to acknowledge that walking and biking is not a top priority for every single person we talk to, and we don't want to proselytize or force this down people's throats if they're more concerned about housing or education or healthcare, whatever the case is. So it just helps to come with sort of a more holistic approach to these planning processes and hear people's concerns, even if they're not directly related to the work that we're doing. Try to connect them with the right resources and build those relationships so that when the time does come to improve walking and biking conditions, you already have those, those champions there and those relationships established. So just sort of a lesson learned from other projects we've worked on. So if you want more information, take a look at the equity analysis memo. There's a lot more detail in there. But if you have any general questions or thoughts, I'd be happy to take those now.
I'll just chime in, I guess. On the growth in bike trips by income level, is that national data or is that Chittenden County data? Or sorry, by race, not by income level.
That graph that I showed?
Yeah.
That's national level, not Chittenden County.
Okay. And I think it would be interesting to see that same graph by income level as well. Just that seems informative. For the data on harassment and racial profiling of active transportation users, do we know, is that data just not being collected when those stops are potentially made, or is it that the data exists but it's not being analyzed or just isn't accessible right now?
Good question. So from my experience, and this is conjecture on my part, I would guess the data is probably not being collected unless there's a really concerted effort to capture that information. In most communities, it goes unreported unless people know otherwise about communities in Chittenden County and what their practices are when it comes to enforcement. But by and large, I don't think that data is available in most communities. If it is, it's often anecdotal, or it's centered around one particularly high-profile case, and then other instances arise to show that it's a more systemic problem. There are a few communities I've worked in where they have like more comprehensive data sets, but that's generally not the case. Other thoughts or questions?
When I was reading through it, I really, I liked seeing that youth were included as a population of focus. And many of the community meetings and groups that I'm in, youth end up being a population that my community partners are working with a lot to improve like access to healthy risk-taking choices. So for example, being able to participate in soccer or taking art classes, having those healthy outlets as a protective factor to prevent like substance use, helping kids feel like they belong in the community. So whenever I was reading through this, through these reports, I was using youth as, that was one of the lenses I was looking through, like how does our transportation support kids to get to these healthy opportunities? So seeing them highlighted in this report, that was something that stood out to me as being a strength, that it was included in there.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Amanda. And to be fair, I think we could add more detail and more nuance and some of the challenges that different age groups face when it comes to walking and biking, since this mapping that we do is pretty high level, but it's good to know that there are others out there who are focusing on that and could maybe provide some more insights just based on your interactions with people as to what the challenges there are, especially in Chittenden County.
Yeah, and actually specifically there was a group called Connecting Cultures who is talking about some challenges they were having getting youth to their day camps, and transportation was one of the main barriers that they were running into. So having that be a part of this discussion, that I came to those reports looking for that information specifically. And so when I saw youth highlighted in there, like, aha, okay. So yeah, it could be something that we build on more too.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have opportunity to do that, to add more context and information when we're putting together the final plan. So the equity memo is pretty much done, but there'll be opportunities in the future to expand on that. Any other thoughts? All right, I'm going to move along to the next analysis, which is a bit more technical. So please bear with me. This is the bicycle network analysis, and starts off with a level of traffic stress analysis. So talk about this and talk about how it feeds into the BNA, and then we're going to share some ongoing work with you on different scenarios that are currently being developed with this data set. So to start off with level of traffic stress, this is analysis that helps identify appropriate bike facilities, generally for people of all comfort levels and experiences, and the LTS score of a particular street segment depends on the number of lanes that are present, traffic volumes, speeds, if a bike facility is present, and what width the bike facility is, and a couple of other factors. We typically use speed limit data because that's what's widely available. If it is available for us, we use prevailing speed or 85th percentile speed, but in a lot of communities, they just don't have that data available. You can see here that residential streets are mostly low stress. So those are the green lines there, and the larger roads in the county are showing in red, which are either higher speed or higher volume or both. This might be a little misleading because so many of those little green squiggly lines don't really go anywhere. So, they're not particularly helpful for connectivity. So like around Burlington and Essex, you can see, a lot of those more dense urban neighborhoods do have a lot of low stress routes, but they can only get you so far. So we really need to focus on turning some of those longer red lines into green ones as part of this project. So this is the first step and sort of the input that goes into the bicycle network analysis, which has 2 other subsequent steps. So the next one is a block-to-block connectivity analysis. And during this step, we route bicycle trips from every census block in the county to every other census block in the county. And we summarize the proportion and the types of destinations that are reachable in each census block. And the memo talks about what those destinations are in different categories, things like parks, retail, schools, universities, employment centers, etc. And then for the last step, we aggregate all those destinations, figure out how many of them are within biking distance and what proportion of them are reachable on low stress bikeways specifically. So these are the results. You can see that, Burlington, South Burlington, Winooski, Essex, those higher density areas have more connectivity. They have a greater proportion of destinations that are reachable through low stress bikeways. You can also see some of the outlying areas in the county, like Huntington, also have somewhat higher scores, and that's probably because they have fewer destinations, but the ones they do have happen to be reachable either by trails or on-street bikeways. So it's a little bit misleading, but I think the main takeaway here is that connectivity in and around Burlington and sort of the urban core of the county is quite a bit higher. And so right now we're working on 2 different scenarios using the BNA. So the scenario means that basically we take a segment that has high LTS score, high stress, and we make changes to it, assuming, that we're going to put a separated bike lane in there in a few years or something like that. We rerun the LTS with that change, and then we see how it impacts the BNA. So this little graphic is showing you how putting in a proposed project can expand connectivity in the census blocks around that project, and see what the changes are there. And the first scenario we're doing is for Route 2. So switch slides here. We're going to study this part of the Route 2 corridor from Burlington to Williston, which is going to capture a few projects that are in the pipelines, including the bike ped bridge over I-89 at exit 14, a couple of other projects in South Burlington and Burlington that are, not underway, but scheduled for construction. So just want to see how those projects are going to affect stress scores and connectivity along that segment. And then the other one is more of a systemic look at the BNA. So this is going to focus on an equity scenario, which will be countywide, looking at possible changes that could benefit EJ populations. So the process here is that we're going to identify environmental justice areas using a set of indicators from the equity analysis, most likely race, poverty levels, and commute mode share. And that's what this map is showing here. It's showing census blocks that have a certain proportion of, racial and ethnic groups or low income groups, et cetera. So we're still figuring out exactly what the thresholds are and how many areas do we want to capture, how expansive do we want this scenario to be, knowing that it's going to take a lot of time and effort for CCRPC to review the results. So this is sort of a first take, but we're going to identify these areas, select all of the high stress links in these environmental justice areas, send those to CCRPC, and then they're going to help us figure out which links are a priority for improving. So which ones do we really want to focus on for like protected bicycle facilities in the future. So when they send us that list, we will convert all of those selected high stress links to low stress. We'll rerun the LTS and the BNA and then share those results to see what has changed. And we would welcome your input on this as well. We want to make sure that these scenarios are feasible and that they're actually achievable within real world constraints. But we also want to push ourselves to achieve something that's actually impactful. So we don't want to be too hemmed in. Try to strike a balance there, so to speak. So those are the two scenarios that we're working on now, sort of in the early stages, and we'll be fleshing those out in the coming weeks. Are there any questions about the BNA, either the baseline scenario I showed you or those items that we're working on right now?
I think there were two different versions of the BNA in the memo that was shared. Can you talk a bit about the difference between those and how each one might be useful?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I'm actually going to pull it up so you can see the difference. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I thought I had this pulled up. All right. Can you all see that? No?
Seeing your presentation slide still.
Okay. About now. You see that?
Yep.
Okay. So what Jonathan was referring to, sorry for that lag, but I thought it'd be worth pulling this up. So the first set of outputs for the BNA looked like this. And so you can see that there's very high scoring census blocks in these pretty rural, somewhat isolated areas. So that's what all these black areas are. And obviously that's not entirely accurate, right? We know that connectivity in many of those areas is pretty low. And that's because the analysis was only capturing, it was capturing destinations that were accessible on the high stress and low stress networks, and not painting an entirely accurate picture. So we reran the analysis to suppress some of those results and only focus on destinations that were accessible on the low stress network. And that's where we get these results. So these are a little bit more realistic, we think, in terms of comparing connectivity between some of these outlying rural areas versus the more urban part of the county. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the second version is going to be what's used going forward.
Yes.
Cool.
Any other questions? All right. Go back to the PowerPoint. Can you all see that now? Okay, great.
Yep.
So moving on to the third analysis, that is the trip potential analysis. And just to refresh your memory, last time we met, I think it was maybe in March or April, we had this question for you. to figure out what the most important origin destination pairs are in the county that we wanted to include in this analysis. And I'll give you a quick refresher as to what this all means. But these were your answers. So focusing on mostly population destinations to other types of destinations. So population employment, population commercial, transit, schools, parks, etc. So those are the ones that really stood out. It's trying to understand where, connecting where people live and where they want to go. And so the way that shook out in the analysis looks like this. These are the origin and destination pairs for the countywide bicycle trip potential. Again, really highlighting the desire to know population connections to other types of destinations, and the countywide and local pedestrian trip potential analyses, most of which again are focused on population with a few other ones. So these are the parameters that we used for this analysis. And before I show you the results, I just want to walk quickly through what this actually means and sort of how it works in practice. So trip potential measures the possible demand for walking and biking in a particular area. It's not measuring existing activity. It's measuring what theoretically could be active transportation activity if we made certain changes to the network. And this particular type of trip potential analysis focuses on origin destination pairing, which is the list that I just showed you. So we developed an index for each of these origin destination data sets that are within walking or biking distance. And it's calculated by going through sort of this iterative process over origin destination pairs, each instance of each type of pair, and drawing a straight line connection between each of those destinations. And then we apply a value to that connection, which is the weights that you see here based on how important we think those types of trips are. So for example, population to employment trip, we're giving a value of 20 because that's a pretty common, important type of trip. Whereas employment to commercial activity trip is a lot less common. So we give that a value of 5. All this is, somewhat subjective and based on what you all think is most appropriate, given your local knowledge of the area and what we think based on our experience in other communities. But, there's no hard and fast rule here. So we apply that weight, and then once we draw the straight line, this it's called a decay is put around the line to show the potential for walking and biking between those two destinations. So that decay factor is sort of like the heat map effect that you're seeing on the bottom there. And just want to note that this type of analysis is, it does a good job at emphasizing potential connections between destinations rather than just highlighting where the destinations are. So we're not just focused on location, we're focused on trying to get people from point A to point B. And also important to note that this is not connected to the underlying transportation network. So you can see we're just drawing a straight line. We're not following the roadway network. And that is to really highlight the potential for improvements. We're not trying to constrain this within the existing roadway network. So I'm going to run through some results now, and I'll take questions after. If you read through this memo, you saw there were quite a few maps in there, and I'm just sharing a couple quick examples. These are the countywide bicycle trip potential results, which, again, sort of intuitive, probably what you all already know from living there, that potential is higher in the more urban areas. We are going to combine these results with BNA scenarios and some of the other tasks we're working on to help develop the recommendations. Pedestrian results. So the initial results really only showed Burlington as having pedestrian trip potential. The rest of the county barely even showed up because there's so much density, there's such a volume of destinations within Burlington that it sort of masked all the other activity in the county. So we did just same thing for the BNA. We did some adjusting and tweaking, applied what's called a logarithmic rescaling factor. Don't ask me to go into what that means because my data analyst is not here right now. And now you can see the results are a bit more true to life. We're not just seeing Burlington as like the one bright red dot on the map, but we're seeing a lot of other potential activity as well. And so this is the pedestrian results overall. You can see there's higher potential again in those urban areas. Some of these corridors connecting like South Burlington and Shelburne, Williston and Burlington, and then some more isolated pockets throughout the county. And I know I'm going through this quickly, but if you have questions, let me know, and you can always take a deeper look at the memo. Then we also looked at two local communities for sort of a deeper dive, and those were Milton and South Burlington. They're two of the fastest growing communities in the county, or actually in the state. And they're both home to populations that have been, historically excluded from these types of planning processes. Neither of those communities has an active transportation plan on the books. So we thought, some additional analysis might be able to support and encourage them in some of their efforts. So we calculated trip potential for all the origin destination pairs shown earlier, including the overall kind of composite scores. I just wanted to show you some of the specific outputs here to show like some of the variation in the results. So you can see there's a lot of variation even between two OD pairs with a common variable. So we're looking at transit commercial and transit employment trips in Milton. So people traveling between like transit stations and retail centers and between transit and job centers. And you can see there's some pretty significant variation in the results between those two types of trips. And then same thing for South Burlington, just a few other examples showing population to commercial walking trips and transit to commercial walking trips. Again, you can see how the patterns shift around based on the type of OD pair that we're talking about. So I will pause here, see if there are any questions about the trip potential analysis. It's too many maps to show you all at once.
And I'll reiterate that, the memos saved in that shared folder has more info than we can really dig into today, but, both Michael and I can answer questions.
I have just a general question about like the definitions of the destination. Which one, or maybe is it, do any of the destinations include like grocery stores, food centers, that kind of thing? Like, I wasn't sure if that would be included under commercial or retail, or if it was part of the destination pairing at all.
Yeah, that's a good question, Amanda. Let me check the memo real quick and see, because I believe we had a list of specific destinations somewhere in there. I'm just doing a word find for grocery stores or food, and I don't see anything coming up. So let me check with our data analyst and just confirm. I would assume like if that was included, it would be in maybe in the commercial destination type. But I'm not sure if or how that was captured exactly. So let me ask him, and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But to your point, I mean, definitely see the value there, right? There are essential needs and services like, healthcare and food access and things like that, which, would be important to capture in something like this. Any other questions or comments? I know that some of this might seem sort of, in the weeds, kind of theoretical, like, okay, we're looking at potential activity. Well, what about, existing activity, and what effect is this going to have on people walking and biking today? And I think I agree, sometimes it feels like there's a disconnect between this type of analytical work and like actually what's happening on the ground. And I think, if we can take these results to places like Milton and South Burlington and show them what the data are saying and see if they agree and see if that encourages them to, you know, think about connections between population and employment centers or between, you know, grocery stores and schools or whatever the case is. You know, some people are convinced by data, some people are more persuaded by, you know, anecdotes and personal experience, and it just sort of depends who the stakeholders are that you're working with. So I would say, you know, it's good to be selective about sharing this data. It's not going to convince everyone, but if you think it could be a helpful tool, then it's nice to have in your back pocket.
I think also these are helpful because they likely show where a lot of these trips are already happening by folks who don't have an option to take another mode other than walking. And so those are folks that are experiencing really dangerous conditions right now when they take these trips. So it's a good, I think it's an interesting representation of that. And it would be great for us to make the infrastructure safe and comfortable for everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point. What that Jonathan just raised is, you know, like, for example, I live on the line of Burlington and South Burlington there, like right by that highway exit, which appears very like deep red, for example, right? But and in many ways, I do like to walk, but there are like significant infrastructure barriers that make that just like a lack of a pleasant experience that deter me from walking. So like to bring this up and say like, look, there is walkability potential in these locations, but how do we back into that potential to promote like a more pleasant or equitable experience, depending on how the case may be. So in terms of like the baseline data, opening up a conversation, I think this is really interesting because then you can kind of back into solutions from it.
Yeah, I think you captured the purpose of this really well, because it's not like the BNA at all, where we're looking at, you know, specific changes to streets based on facility type and stress level. It's not connected to the network. It's really just all about the destinations that are there. And, you know, what would it look like if we did happen to connect all those destinations with, you know, high comfort, low stress walking and biking amenities. And so, yeah, I think hopefully seeing this potential can inspire people to you know, strive for that change. All right, not hearing other questions, so I'm going to move us along to the last analysis, which is just a very quick recap of what we've been working on more recently. So this is the unpaved trail analysis, and just to sort of explain the purpose of this task, we want the transportation system for people walking and biking to be accessible. So typically that means paved surfaces, but we know that that's not going to be feasible everywhere. And we know that Chittenden County has a pretty extensive unpaved trail network for, you know, recreation, for hiking and mountain biking, et cetera. So CCRPC thought it would be prudent to look at that network as we're developing recommendations for this plan update, and see if there are any unpaved trails that really have a lot of activity or use that maybe we could pull into our recommendations, and maybe, you know, use them as sort of contingency option in constrained conditions where, you know, paved surfaces or, you know, on-road routes are not feasible, where they're too expensive, or there's, you know, too much terrain or other challenges. Where could those unpaved trails really fill in some critical gaps in the network? So we did some basic data consolidation and a little bit of analysis in GIS, and we highlighted Strava user data that occurs on unpaved trails. So this is showing all the Strava data throughout the county, not just the trails. And then we drew a 200-foot buffer around known unpaved trails, mainly from CCRPC's Close the Gaps map. And these are the unpaved trails that really pop out as high activity. And again, I should caveat that, you know, you all probably know Strava is a very select user group. It's not representative of everybody walking and biking, because you have to opt into that app for it to track your activity. So, you know, there are definitely some assumptions and constraints within this analysis, but it's giving us at least some idea of, you know, the unpaved trail, you know, popular routes and locations in the county. So just highlighted a few of those in bold This is a first pass. We want to share this with you all and with other local folks who have a lot of knowledge and expertise of the unpaved trail systems in the county. See if we're missing anything, if there are other spots that pop out for them, just based on their own experience. And yeah, Brian is reviewing this now. So again, just sort of a first take, but I wanted to share it with you all. So any initial reactions or thoughts or questions?
So the intent with this map that we're looking at right now is just to show where the activity is happening on unpaved trails. It's not necessarily to show us which unpaved trail corridors might be prioritized as part of the transportation network. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, this is just the first step. So eventually when we're developing preliminary infrastructure recommendations and projects in the next task, we're going to overlay them with these results and see if there are any logical connections where it would make sense to maybe like designate an unpaved trail as an official connection between, two other facilities in the county. And yeah, again, first take. So definitely want your feedback on what's missing here and whether this seems accurate.
Yeah, I guess one of the challenges inherent with using that Strava data is you're not going to see the less popular networks, which may still be really important for local connections. And so I'm thinking of, for example, Charlotte has a pretty extensive trail network that I think does provide some of those connections within the community, but probably because Charlotte's such a small community, it's likely not showing up much on Strava data. So yeah, I wonder how we get those pieces of the trail network integrated into this.
Yeah, the good point. So the web map that's on CCRPC's website is another really helpful input that we'll look at and see if that's capturing any unpaved trail possibilities that aren't shown up here. And also just talking to people in Charlotte and confirming that there are some critical connections there that we might be able to use. This doesn't have to rely solely on Strava and these other data sets we have. It can be a bit more of a combined quantitative and qualitative approach to make sure we're capturing everything.
Yeah, I wonder too about, especially as we look at, maybe new trail development, pulling in the VAST network and seeing if there are any really critical links there that are, a lot of that is private land, but it's, owned by folks who have shown a willingness to provide access at least part of the year. So maybe it's worth seeing if there are any really critical pieces that could be utilized there that we want to look at, maybe, putting into a land trust or getting some kind of easement in place.
Any other questions or comments?
And I'll just add, this is something that I'm particularly interested in because I know that there are some networks out there, and Lauren, I see you there, and I know that Winooski Valley Park District has some great parcels with existing trails. So are there opportunities to use those as connections, such as the Burlington Wildways? It's a 5-mile trail from Winooski all the way up through the North End, which is amazing. So there are opportunities like that in other parts of the county that aren't just connecting existing mountain bike trail networks, but really could connect a village center or neighborhood to a school. Or in Shelburne, right? There's some neighborhoods being built that you can get from one to the other and then to the village. So this, this Strava map, right? It doesn't capture everything that we know. We'll share something in the future that will get your input. Jonathan, I'm looking at you, sort of how we can leverage those relationships with the walk bike trail committees to really get their on the ground knowledge. There's another tool that Michael didn't mention, that USGS has that I have pulled up here, but this isn't showing a lot of the paved trail networks that exist in Williston, South Burlington, those other communities that are there, but maybe there's a missing piece on each end to get from one neighborhood to a school or to a shopping center or so on. So we're trying to figure out sort of what's in the scope that tool can do based on the budget available. What can we do on our end as staff to sort of put those pieces together? So we may be coming to you with some of that help and just sort of fine tuning some of that. So exciting stuff, I think.
And to Brian's point, there is a separate map we created that shows Strava activity on all the trails, including paved. So maybe it turns out that that's, you know, a more useful output as we're working on recommendations, or maybe we look at a combination of both, depending on what you all think. All right, I'm going to move along. Oh, was there another question?
I was just going to kind of make a comment as like a Strava user. You know, you can designate like your rides as commuting versus just like recreating or for exercise purposes. I don't know how many people actually do that, but if that might be an interesting filter to potentially apply if you have the ability through looking at the Strava data to see, you know, where people are, like what routes they're specifically using to commute to certain areas. Because yeah, these jump out as, you know, these are more recreation destinations than like commuting, but having connection to those that eliminate the need of a car is interesting too. So
yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. I mean, we have a pretty robust data set from Strava, so we can check and see what other attributes are in there, but it might be the case that we could filter by trip type. All right, I know we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to quickly go over task 4 and then hand it off to Brian for a public feedback update. So real quick, we're starting on this now. Task 4 is the recommendations task, consists of two different items, the infrastructure recommendations and program and policy recommendations. So for infrastructure, on the left, you can see our sort of rudimentary process graphic here. We're going to take the analysis results, specifically trip potential and bicycle network analysis, overlay them with planned projects from CCRPC's TIP and MTP, as well as feedback from the public web map. And based on all of those inputs, we're going to manually draw a preliminary countywide active transportation network. No facility types, no project extents or anything like that, just very basic, high level, you know, these are the corridors that we want to consider. We will share that with CCRPC and with you all. And then once that's confirmed, we'll delve deeper into, you know, assigning facility types and things like that to each part of the network. And then we're also going to be working on program and policy recommendations, which might be a combination of some of the examples shown here. We haven't started this task yet, so we need to have some discussion with Brian and others about, you know, what makes the most sense, where would be the most value in focusing on program and policy improvements. And we will be working on this through August, hopefully finalized in September, and we'll be plugging you all in along the way as needed. And Brian, I will hand it to you for public feedback update.
Sure, thanks. So our approach with public feedback is a little bit different this time than in years past and with other projects. We tried to focus on different population groups this time. So as a part of that, we hosted different listening sessions, and we hosted 7 of those. Michael mentioned the one with AARP early on. We did a couple with UVM. We did one with an Arabic speaking group. We did one with some folks that participated in an equity summit that RPC hosted in the fall. So we tried to hit, you know, get some different perspectives from different people who might not show up to a regular meeting that we might have for a project. Mike also mentioned the online map that we had live. We received, you know, more than 300 comments on those, suggesting different routes or identifying barriers. Pam is providing all of that data to Tool. Another way was to just send me an email. I received more than 40 of those emails from people, which is great. Happy to communicate with folks that way. There were some different events or places that I just went to and had informal conversations with people. at the Vermont Walk Bike Summit, I had a table, chatted with folks there. Battery Park in Burlington. Old Spokes Home does a mobile repair workshop. I went to one of those at the Winooski Public Library. So trying to hit different places that we might not otherwise go to. And it's also laying the groundwork to continue these conversations with folks for upcoming projects. For example, we're going to do a walk bike plan for Winooski this coming fiscal year. So we're trying to foster those relationships with different groups. We also did sort of the more traditional things, asked our partners to promote via their newsletters and emails and social media, had things on our website and our newsletter, Front Porch Forum that, is usually very productive in getting feedback. So that's a good tool for us. If you look at the general themes here, I don't think you'll be shocked or surprised at what you're seeing here. People are concerned about the traffic volumes and speeds. They just feel unsafe if there is no protection or separation. Sometimes the intersections themselves can be challenging to cross. Even just the maintenance, maybe not even of a bike lane, but just the road surface itself. People feel that's a priority. I think that covers sort of those themes, but like I mentioned, all of those data sources that we got, we're working with Tool to sort of tease out those themes and identify some other ones that may show up. And again, plug into those sort of data analysis and the maps that Tool created so we can see how all that fits in there. And, we pulled the online map maybe a week ago now, but if people are still reaching out to me, I'm still collecting that information. We're capturing that, sharing that. So if you're hearing from many of the people in your networks, feel free to send them my way.
Great. I think that brings us home to our final slide. So like I said, next steps, working on recommendations in the coming months, moving on to prioritizing those different projects in October and November, and then working on the final plan in December and wrapping up by the end of the year. Any final thoughts, questions, comments from anybody?
Yeah, just one thing on level of traffic stress, because it seems kind of foundational to a lot of the analysis we're doing. I sent Brian some comments about, if we could maybe adjust how we're evaluating LTS to account for, a lot of prevailing speeds, or prevailing speed often being higher than posted speed by 5 or 10 miles an hour, depending on the road. Is that something that's being considered, making some adjustments to how we're evaluating that network element?
Yeah, thanks for reminding us, Jonathan. So our analysts saw those comments and sent some responses, which we can pass along to you. Generally, he said that, while we could, raise speeds by 5 to 10 miles an hour to better reflect like prevailing speed, that might make the analysis more accurate in some areas. It might also be detrimental in other areas where the speed limit is actually more reflective of prevailing speed. So maybe, it would be more accurate on like lower volume rural roads, but it would make the analysis like less accurate in like downtown Burlington and Winooski. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, and it's hard to say if it, overall it would really increase the accuracy or if it would just sort of be a wash. So I think he's a little bit hesitant to go that route. I don't know, Brian, if you have thoughts, or if there are other things we want to consider in terms of adjusting that analysis or the inputs.
Yeah, and those of you who sort of explored that online map that Pam created, and you could click on each sort of segment and see all the data that went into that. And we didn't have the capacity to go through all of that and quality control that. We did some spot checks here and there to make sure some things were right. But even though some of the speed inputs might be incorrect, we had the conversation of, do we want to do sort of blanket adjustment on that county-wide? And our feeling was no, that didn't really fit with what we wanted to do. wouldn't seem like it would make the changes that we wanted to see, just wouldn't reflect reality or what's possible. And I think the same, Jonathan, I did share your comments with them to get Thasia's feedback on, like, is this possible? So same thing with sort of adjusting that prevailing speed. It's very data intensive and labor intensive to do that. But I think that it's something that we could note in the final report, right? That we consider this so that it reflects, like, did we think all this through in these different ways? And I think someone with Thasia's expertise, we can speak to that.
And I'm gonna put you on mute, Brian. I'm not sure what's happening, but just to follow up, like, yeah, we can't go in and examine every segment of the network manually, but if there are particular streets that are showing up as high stress that we know are low stress, or vice versa, like you mentioned a few streets in your email, Jonathan. So if you all look at the map and see like blatant errors that we need to adjust, we can definitely go in and make those changes. We just can't do it on a systemic level given the budget.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I totally get that it's sort of a double-edged sword when you make that kind of change. One thing that might be helpful for reviewing the maps, if I can take some time and look through them, is if we could maybe filter out the residential streets or the streets that don't have a functional class, just so that there's not quite as much on there to sort of wade through.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So if you have GIS or ArcMap or whatever, we can just send you the data set and you can turn that layer off. If anybody else wants to look at the data set, I think it would be okay to share that out.
And Michael, I wanted to ask you, not knowing if folks had the time to read through all the memos in there, but if people, would you want people to make comments right in those memos at this point?
Yeah, that would be fine. Kind of like what Amanda was saying earlier about capturing the youth perspective in the equity memo. Like, I don't think we're going to go back and update these documents specifically, but all of this is feeding into the final plan. So there will be an opportunity to make changes to all the content before we wrap up the contract. So yeah, feel free to make comments in those PDFs or just send comments by email to Brian, whatever is easiest for you. And we'll make sure that we capture those and follow up if we have any questions.
And thank you all for taking the time to join today. I know it was a smaller group, but I captured some notes. We recorded it to share with those who weren't with us today. So thanks again for your time, for your insights and thoughtful comments on this. We appreciate it. It's Michael and his team share stuff with us, but it really depends on all y'all's input too, to help get us to the right place.
All right, thanks everyone.
Okay.
See you
Thank
next time.
you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Y'all have a good afternoon.